Frigate NVR version 0.12 is out with lots of interesting updates. So let's jump right into the update process and I'll go through what's new. So in this video, I'm going to assume that you're familiar with Docker Compose and that you know how to create a Docker Compose file. I will show you what my Compose file looks like and talk a little bit about a couple of these things in here. So first of all, this is my Docker Compose file. And basically what we go through is we create the Frigate 2 container, restart it unless it's stopped, which means we always want it running unless I actually stop it. The most important line here, or one of the most important lines here, is the version that you're trying to download. Currently, the stable version is 0.12. If you want to specify a different version, you would apply that tag here. We'll talk a little bit about the TensorRT in just a minute. I have some different devices that I use. If you want to use the USB Coral, you do this right here. Then you can also use the PCIe Coral, or you can use hardware acceleration from Intel. These are all devices that are built into the stock configuration or Docker Compose file, and I just left them the way they were. I do use a Coral TPU. Volumes are important. You need to make sure that you're mapping the volumes properly. The local volume on your local device is the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side of the colon is the mapped document or the mapped container in the Docker container. So I map all of my stuff here. And then if you want to set tempfs sizes and stuff like that, you can change that. I don't modify that. This is all set up in the default Docker Compose file that I got off the Frigate website. And then if you want to do anything with ports, you set them up here. I left everything as default, port 5000 for the Frigate UI, 1935 for RTMP. However, RTMP is being deprecated. So consider that when you're setting up these ports. And then if you want to stream or if you want to stream Bird's Eye, you can do that using port 8554, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then you can set up your Frigate RTSP password if you want to set one there. You have to build this Docker Compose file before you do anything else. The assumption, again, is that you know what you're doing with Docker. I will show you some very basic stuff, but not go into detail. I do have other videos that talk about how to go through this entire Docker install from start to finish if you want to use those. In addition to having a Docker Compose file, you cannot start up Frigate without a valid configuration file. So my configuration file is basically this right here. And don't worry about reading through this whole thing in the video. I have it all posted in my companion blog post to this video. And I'll link that down below. But basically, we're going to use what we already had with some exceptions. One example here is the go2rtc section. This is new in version 12. And it allows me to use one stream from my camera for feeding all the Frigate functions. So I would actually go down here and then set my path to be the RTSP stream on port 8554. It just talks back to Frigate. And so if I'm doing a lot of connections to the cameras from various tablets and stuff, it would use one connection to the camera and pull everything else from Frigate directly through an RTSP stream. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So you need to set up a config file. And you need to make sure that you've got your Docker Compose file and all of that set in the same directory that we're going to be using here in just a moment. So if we go into SSH terminal where we've got ourselves logged into our Frigate device, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're in the right directory with the Docker Compose directory or file and the config file. And once you have all that set up in the directory, you're going to go ahead and run a command called Docker Compose. And you're going to use the word up as the flag. And then once you do that, it's going to go pull down all of the Frigate information if it doesn't already have the image. If it already has the image, it'll just start it up. I don't have the version 12 image on this device, so it's going to go ahead and pull all of that down. And then once it's done that, it will go ahead and try to start up Frigate with the configuration file that we have set in this directory. So we'll give this just a second while it downloads everything and come back and see how it starts up. All right, so now it's created the Frigate container. You can see that going on here. And now it's starting all of the camera information. And it's starting all of the health checks for go2rtc. Now, if you don't have any errors, this is the output you should see. If you do have errors, they will pop up in here and it will prevent Frigate from starting. Typically what I see whenever you see errors is either your volumes are not properly set up, so you're not mapped to the correct volumes, or you have some sort of problem with your configuration file. Configuration file is in YAML, so you have to observe proper spacing and syntax. If you don't do that, then you won't be able to start up. You'll have a config error, and it will tell you in this output what you have. In addition to that, if you're running an older version of Frigate and you upgrade to some later version, it's possible that some of the configuration options have changed in the file. And in that case, Frigate won't start because you have the wrong configuration option. So make sure that you're using the latest configuration file syntax for the version of Frigate that you're running. Now that Frigate is up and running, we can start playing with it. And I'll start going through some of the fun stuff that has now been set up in the new Frigate version. Also, this is the last version that will support 32-bit ARM. So if you're running something other than, or if you're running a 32-bit ARM architecture, you need to start thinking about changing that, or you're going to be stuck on this version for a while. There are some breaking changes here. Again, we're no longer pushing images to Docker Hub. Those are all going to be coming out of the GitHub container registry. And here's the link. And in my Docker Compose file, you'll notice that I'm already using that. This is the latest release from the GitHub container registry. And that's where we'll pull the latest stable version from. If you're using the Home Assistant integration, which I am, make sure you're on version 4.0. As of this video, that was released a few days ago. And so you'll need to make sure you're updated to version 4.0 of the integration. Otherwise, you'll have problems. There have been some changes made to the database. You need to make a backup copy of the database if you want to be able to roll back. And then there's some other issues and breaking changes that you can look through here if you want to. One other one that I'll call out is changes have been made to the way recording segments are stored. If you're using any scripts to call the media that you're storing from your cameras, you may need to change that so that the structure is set up the way the new system works. And that's also noted later in this page. And then RTMP is disabled by default because the RTSP streams via go2rtc are the recommended method for doing stuff. So those are the breaking changes, and those are always the least fun to talk about. Some new stuff that's happened here in this new version is that if you ever had a problem running out of storage, now Frigate will actually start deleting the oldest recordings once it hits 1 hour left in the storage space. Also, it will not fail if there's no space to save the recording. So it's a fail-safe, an improvement to make it more resilient. It'll just start dumping stuff, older recordings off instead of recording new ones, or stop recording new ones. This is a big one here. go2rtc is now bundled inside Frigate. It can be set directly inside Frigate's config file nested under the go2rtc section. And that's what I showed you just a moment ago. Under this try to say that 5 times fast. Under this go2rtc section, you will see here that all you have to do is set a main and a sub. You can set whatever you want here, but basically what this means is that as long as you set this for the camera name down in your camera configuration section, it will use this as the stream for your camera and then feed that out via go2rtc and RTSP to other devices. So it prevents you from restreaming, like I said, a bunch of streams from a single camera. It will restream it and pull one in and then send it out, kind of like what RTMP used to do. So you notice I have driveway and driveway sub here. That's my main recording stream and my sub stream that I use for detection. If we come down here and look at the section in the configuration file, you have your path to your driveway sub. That's my detect stream. And then your path to your main stream, which is my recording stream. And both of these have input arguments for preset RTSP restream. Basically, that means that it's going to restream those streams from the go2rtc section listed above there. Again, the entire configuration file will be in my accompanying blog, so you don't have to try to figure it out by watching the video. You can go get the blog, and you can use whatever bits and pieces of that you want to use. All right, so let's go back over here and look at some more stuff here. As it says here, due to the many issues with RTMP, it's deprecated in favor of using the bundled go2rtc to provide the RTSP streams. They can be used by Frigate to reduce connections to the camera, and that's what we just talked about. Bird's eye streaming is now also supported using the Frigate IP, and that port 8554. Remember, when you go into your docker.compose file, you need to map 8554 for both the restream in Birdseye and also the restream that you're using with go2rtc. So make sure this port is mapped if you want to do that. And it says that right here. The one thing about Birdseye that I found is that it does increase the CPU usage on your device, and it's always streaming, even when nothing's going on. So just keep that in mind. I have not found that to be valuable because on my dashboards, I automatically have automations that can switch over to the camera feeds whenever there's action detected in one of the cameras. So I don't worry so much about Birdseye. But if you're using Birdseye and you want that feed to be streaming all the time, you can do that way. New live stream options enables MSC and WebRTC, so you can have full frame rate video that supports audio, and you have to enable that. In my configuration file, I actually have a section here under my camera that has audio on it, and it's got an output argument, preset record generic audio, and I'm running AAC audio from my cameras. This is an ffmpeg preset, and there's a lot of different presets that you can actually use in the cameras, and there's a whole page on presets for input args and output arg presets for generic audio copy, so that's recording with original audio, recording with AAC audio, recording MJPEG stream. I mean, all kinds of things that in the past you used to have to use really long presets or really long hardware arguments. Now you just use a preset for most common scenarios, and that prevents you from having to come up with all of that preset stuff. Okay, there's that. And then MSC is not supported on iPhones. It's supported on everything else. WebRTC will likely require additional setup if you want to use that. In my case, when I use the Frigate cards on Home Assistant, I just use the built-in Home Assistant option, and it picks the right one from all of my stuff. I don't have to do any configuration. All right, so those are some of the new features, specific features. There are a lot of UI features as well. We'll go over to those in just a moment here. So in the Frigate page, there's some new pages here. System used to be called debug, and now it's been called system. It gives you a lot more options here. You can see your detector performance, inference speed, CPU percent, memory percentage. You can also go to the go2rtc dashboard here, and this gives you all of your cameras. And you can click on any of these streams, two-way audio links, and all of this stuff in this particular go2rtc dashboard. So you can see all of the stuff that's in here. So it's one way to just quickly stream any of these devices or get more information on it. You can see all of the information just for this camera, the producers and the consumers. So it's an easy way to debug your go2rtc information. In addition to that, you have all of your GPU information if you had a GPU, and then you have your VA info link. And then under each camera, you have your probe data, and then all of the information for the camera that's being used. So you have your ffmpeg PID, your capture, your detect, CPU percentage for each one of those in memory. So if you have a camera that's hogging all this stuff, you can see at a glance what it's doing. In addition to this, you have a storage page. And this storage page gives you information on memory and other things related to the storage of your recordings. So right now I've got 146 gig used with 229 gigs remaining. And this is based on the mapping of the volumes that you did in the Docker Compose file. So whatever location you stored this stuff in, this is what it's looking at for that. Give you your information for your memory, for your shim and your cache. So there's that right there. And then for each camera, you get the stream bandwidth that's being used for each of those cameras. So right now, the garage is 717 megabits an hour. And then my highest one looks like the deck at 1.77 gigabits per hour. And that changes based on your camera settings that you have set up that are coming into Frigates. All right, what else do we have here? New detector types. We've got an OpenVINO. It runs the OpenVINO IR model on a CPU, GPU, and VPU hardware. For 6th gen platforms and newer, you have to use a supported Intel platform for the GPU. You also have TensorRT. It may be used for object detection using the TensorRT libraries. This is not built in directly to the stable image. You actually have to add the TensorRT tag on the end of it in order to be able to download that. You can find that on my blog. It has the TensorRT tag appended to the version, so you can download this if you want to use this kind of detector. What this does for you is it gets you away from having to use the Coral CPU or the Coral TPU, because as we all know, those are incredibly hard to find. So if you have a GPU or something else you can apply to doing the object detection work in Frigate, then this is a way to go. It gives you options for GPU, CPU, and VPUs. So dig into that if you need to do that, if you can't find a Coral TPU or you can't get the Coral TPUs to work on something like a VM where you can't pass the USB through. All right, and let's go back over here real quick. I forgot a page. Let's talk about the logs page. We do have logs for Frigate, go2rtc, and Nginx, so you can look at each one of these specifically. Nginx has a lot of the connections that are being made to Frigate. Copy these to clipboard. And then finally, there's a config directory here, or config option. And under the config option, you can actually edit this file directly in here, and then save and restart. Now, if you've got your file set up to be read only, like I do, it's not going to work. So if I go over to my Docker Compose, you can see here that my config.yml directory is mounted as read only. You're going to have to make this read write if you want this to be able to be written to from the UI. So if I want to modify my config file, I have to log into the server and I have to go to SSH and do it this way. Otherwise, if I can just edit it this way using the read write function, then I just do it here. I can save and restart or just save it or whatever. So this makes it really nice to be able to edit the file directly in the UI without having to go into the server. So if you want to spend some time tweaking some values and not have to SSH in all the time and restart your Docker container and everything else, this is the way to do it. So that's really nice. What else? So we talked about the system page storage, new logs. We talked about config editor. MQTT is no longer a requirement. If you don't use the Home Assistant integration and you're not using MQTT for any other kind of event tracking, you don't need it. It'll also start up if you've got your MQTT config incorrect. So if you do use the Home Assistant integration, you need to make sure that you have updated to version 4.0. In addition, you need to make sure you're still running MQTT. That is the requirement. As we talked about, there's a bunch of presets that you can set. Rather than doing this, you just do this. And that makes a huge difference in the amount of work you have to do to come up with the actual arguments and the amount of stuff you have to type in here. And finally, there's an improved events filter. So if we go over here and we look at our events and we want to select cameras, you just choose the cameras that you want to pick on here. And that's it. And same thing with zones. If you want to choose certain zones, then you can just get rid of all events that are specific to a certain zone. And that's all you have to do there. So super easy to now select a bunch of selectors and event filters. All right. There's a lot more in here, including how the recordings update file format has changed. We just talked about that a minute ago. Make sure if you're doing something with these files that with an external script, you come over here and make sure you see how it's basically changed. And with that, just a quick video again on Frigate version 12 and the changes that are there. If you're running it now, it's super simple to update if you're familiar with Docker. If you're starting fresh, then do what I did with the Docker containers. Use that Docker Compose file, set that correctly for your environment. Also set up the config file. Again, all that's on my blog. And then fire up Frigate and away you go. Frigate works with a ton of different cameras, and I'm only scratching the surface on what you can do with Frigate and the things you can configure in Frigate. If you want to know more, make sure you go to the Frigate website and read about that. There's also Frigate Plus, which allows you to submit your recordings and your detections to Frigate for them to process it and build the model out and make improvements to the model. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below and also on Discord. If you are not a subscriber, I really would appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you're notified when I post new videos. And for those that are channel members, I really appreciate the support. If you want to be a channel member and support what I do, you can also click that join button down below. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next video.